Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Today we're going to be discussing a program which will assist those on the autism spectrum. Joining me to discuss this program is our guest, Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, who represents the 111th Assembly District, Albany, Schenectady, and Montgomery counties. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Hi, Liz. Great to be back.
Always great to see you. Now, you chair the State Assembly Subcommittee on Autism Spectrum Disorders, and you're looking to set up a new program in New York State that would make emergency rooms more autism-friendly. First of all, what can you tell us about the proposal and how would it work?
Well, this is actually a proposal that I pitched last year as part of my my autism action plan. A number of bills trying to address some of the common challenges that we hear from families with this particular issue. This is something that requires some funding, and the way the program works, emergency rooms, they can be pretty hectic places just in general. But when you have a child or a loved one with autism, and I've experienced this myself with my family, with my son Michael that we talked about in the last show, who is now 17, going to be 18 in October. Some of the sensory issues cause it's sort of a barrier to getting a good diagnosis and to better serving this community. So when you come through an emergency room, just a lot going on. So the sensory, trying to address some of those sensory issues can really go a long way to providing the health care that this community needs.
Now, what are some of the sensory needs that could be addressed with this?
Well, this is when we talk about sensory needs, and I think we talked about this on the last show with the ID card, which could be helpful in this situation as well. So when I say these bills work together, that autism ID card can convey the information that we're talking about. It could be sensitivity to light. My son has sensitivity to bright lights, and a healthcare provider, doctor, nurse may not know that, so they may just do what they would normally do. Noise, sometimes lowering the lights, reducing the noise. Having some items, sensory items. We talked about my son with the rubber bands, and some other sensory items in the emergency room that can really sort of eliminate some of the sensory issues and really get to the heart of the diagnosis, trying to find out what exactly is the health issue. And that's really the only way we're going to be able to provide good health care in emergency rooms when it is an emergency, without addressing the sensory needs and really having an understanding of what autism is. And again, this is not just autism. Although it's coined as an autism-friendly emergency room, it is really related conditions as well. And I talked about that again at the last with the ID cards on our last show. But this is an initiative that I think can be done. I'm looking for it in this the state budget, obviously, because there's funding involved. And I hope this is something we can roll out this year and begin to make a difference for those that go to the emergency room with loved ones that are affected.
Now, if you don't mind sharing some of your firsthand experiences with your son, Michael.
Yeah, and I just said, I've been through, so I'm from Schenectady County. I live in Rotterdam. A couple times when my son was younger, I had to go to the emergency room. I experienced some of these issues, and we did the best we could to get through the process. And as I said, emergency rooms are, sometimes they can be, it can just be a busy place, not really an environment that's helpful. That it just adds to the anxiety and the stress, and that's what happened to my son. It just adds to the anxiety and the stress. But it's important, when it's an emergency, it's an emergency, and you got to get the health care that you need. With my son, he lacks the communication, so it's hard to really figure out what it is, what we need to treat. And I went through there a couple of times, and the sensory issues were just getting in the way. So I think making some minor changes, and that's what's nice about this program, is that it doesn't take away anything from an emergency room hospital or hospital emergency room. It doesn't take anything away, because that space can be used by anybody. What this does, by integrating some sensory items, sensitivity, addressing the sensitivity issues in the room, I think that just opens it up to be able to serve more people when they have this type of condition.
Now, have you heard from others in your community about this issue?
Yeah, and that's how we. That's a lot of the bills that I have in my autism plan come from the community, and I experienced it firsthand, but I hear from people as well. You hear from people in the community with similar trouble at the emergency room, we did pass a bill for the telemedicine, but that doesn't always work. That diagnosis, sometimes you just have to go. And there's no way around it. So I've heard from families. I hear from people here up at the Capitol when they come visit. We hear about things like this. We also hear, the stats. We look at the stats. So a person with autism going into an emergency room or a hospital stay, the stats show that their stay is much, much longer than most people with the same type of going in for the same type of treatment because it's harder to diagnose. Not being able to address some of these other items before we can get to the healthcare part really makes the stay much longer. Sometimes it can be a traumatic experience for kids going through there, having to just this sensory overload that they never want to go back there again. So it's just such a traumatic experience, and we don't want that to happen. We want the hospitals and emergency rooms and healthcare to be accessible, to be comfortable for people to be able to go get healthcare when they need it. And it's tough for parents too, because parents know they got to get the health care for their kids when they need it, and we don't want it to be a traumatic experience for kids. My son's a little older now, so he's a little more used to the hospital setting, but it's still difficult. It's still difficult with the sensory issues that he does have.
Now, in addition to the physical changes to the emergency rooms, you'd like to see an autism team set up.
Yeah, and actually that's part of, the training is always the most important part. That's part of this pilot program that we're talking about in the state budget this year that will provide the training, sort of cross-training. So again, it doesn't take away the space, it also doesn't take away your staff. What it does is just gives some additional training to be able to recognize the signs of autism, to be able to know how to respond, what to do, and to give that information to the caregivers, whether it's a doctor or a nurse, to be able to provide sort of an individualized plan that, hey, these are some of the things we don't want to do with this patient because sometimes it can make things worse. We may think, if you don't have that training behind it, sometimes you may think you're helping and it actually may make things worse. We talked about this with the training for first responders. Very similar here, that this training, and this is something that most hospitals that I've talked to, they like the idea of doing this. They want to be able to serve as much as the community as they can and be able to address their needs so that they can do what they need to do, which is provide the health care.
Are there similar programs in other states?
Yeah, and that's, the hospitals I talk to locally are all, happy with this proposal. I think they like the idea of it. I visited a hospital in Orlando that actually had a program like this. I went through their sensory emergency room, the setting that they had. And there was a number of things, and it's not really, we're not talking about high cost changes. We're talking about sometimes it's lighting, sound. They had a couple of sensory kits that included things like rubber bands and different sensory items in there. Because every kid may have different, my son likes rubber bands, but it's not always rubber bands. But things like that, they really go a long way. These little subtle changes really go a long way, addressing noise. Sometimes it's speaking softly, the number of people in the room, these all can really make a big difference. So that training that's been implemented in the hospital that I visited, I think those changes can be done very easily here for our New York hospitals. I think they can be done fairly quickly. It's just implementing the program, getting the funding that we need to do it. And I think it's something that could be very successful. They've seen success in the hospital I visited in Orlando. The numbers show how successful it's been, how people have reacted to it. And I think it's something that we don't want to be behind on these issues. We want to get ahead of them. And I think seeing that it has worked in other places, I think we got to take a look at this program and roll it out here. So that we can start to implement some of these measures that make a big difference for families.
And this is a proposal you'd like to see included in this year's budget?
Yeah, so the funding, it's mostly the funding part of it that we want to see done. So we're proposing this as a pilot program. We don't have this type of program in New York. So we're looking to do a partnership. For me, I live in Schenectady County. I've talked to Ellis Hospital, which is actually Ellis Medicine now, and they partnered up, and they're all for this. They'd love to get the teams trained, to get a few of the emergency rooms converted over to a sensory-friendly setting, and to be able to collect some data on this too, and show how many visits are we getting, how many times are we using these rooms, and to see what that data actually shows in real-world numbers. I think will show that this is a program that's worth doing across the state in all the hospitals. But we're going with a pilot program so that we can just demonstrate the effectiveness of this, and we hope to get some feedback too of people that do have to that do go to the emergency rooms and are utilizing this program.
Now, this is in addition to your Autism Action Plan, excuse me. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so the Autism Action Plan, we talked about the ID card. What the Autism Plan is meant to do is, the bills work together. So the Autism ID card, it can be used for a number of things. This is one of the situations where it can be used, having that information accessible to say, you have sensory issues, what are they? And having this program in place in an emergency room, having the training on it already, so you can begin to see how these pieces fit together, and that a person that's affected by autism or related conditions can make a big difference for their experience with healthcare. We talked about going to the airport, security, so a number of other things. And the training for first responders that was initiated last year, another bill that I introduced. Now that training's happening, so you may have somebody that's EMS that's working it may be in an ambulance or in the emergency room or any other emergency. They're going to have that training. So from the time someone is transported, during that time, you have people, you have personnel, you have staff that's trained to understand autism, to understand what they can do to serve these individuals, to make sure that they're doing the best they can. And everybody's been really receptive to the training, and I think this training will just tie into everything else we've done in the past few years with the Autism Action Plan. And this is certainly not the end of it, but I think it's another step in the right direction to begin to address these challenges that we hear from people in the community.
And certainly, if people have questions about this, they can contact your office. Yes,
I've been encouraging people. I put out a newsletter, an Autism Action Alert is what I call it. People can get alerts via email, or we mail out newsletters as well. They can sign up for it on my website. Anytime new bills like this are introduced or passed or signed into law or become available, they get those alerts. It's worked out very well. We have thousands and thousands of people signed up to receive that, and we hope to get more people involved that want to receive this kind of information, so that at least they know these types of things are available or are going to be available very soon.
And the Autism Action Day is coming up also.
Yes, and I want to remind people, my Autism Action Day is coming up, and I have the date somewhere here, April 10th, Wednesday, April 10th, up here at the Capitol. People can sign up and begin reserving their space. And this is our yearly event. We have hundreds and hundreds that come up. We put them together with legislators, with advocates. We have guest speakers, and people like the Autism Society will be here. And it's a chance for people to come together and talk about these challenges, because talking about them is what turns them into legislation and funding that can make a difference in our state.
That's right. Talk to your legislator and get these bills passed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, who represents the 111th Assembly District, Albany, Schenectady, and Montgomery counties. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.